No, not again. So you want to see me put together the motor? All right, stay tuned. So, I guess to start out, we'll have to take things apart as usual. I'm taking this oil pan off so that I can powder coat it. I didn't know whether I was going to paint it or powder coat it, but I've decided to go with powder coat. So we're going to put some stripper on it, get the old paint off. While we're waiting for that stripper to dry, we'll start putting some parts on the motor.
Now I'm the king of the swingers, oh, the jungle VIP. I've reached the top and had to stop, and that's what's bothering me. I want to be a man cub.
That blade, of course, is where the fuel pump would go, but we have an electric fuel pump back at the tank, so I decided to mount the coil there with the homemade block-off plate. Now, as in the past, I like to pre-assemble all my motors because they're really hard on the back and the ankles when you have to lean over that thing to reach the motor when it's in the car. So in putting water pumps in these things, I often find that they either hit or they have too much clearance and the pump doesn't work right. Of course, this one with a new gasket is thinner, and so once I tightened it down, I couldn't turn it. It bound up against the inside housing. It looks like I'm turning it there, but I'm not. So let's count how many times I had to pull this thing off and just very lightly file down the fins. I would put a marker on the end of the fins, rotate it in the housing, figure out where it's rubbing, remove the thing, very slightly file it down, trying to keep all the angles and everything correct, and then put it back in and do the same thing. So I think that's the third time I've had to put it back in. There's the fourth try. Almost there. And the fifth one. Now I know that those fins on that pump are right against that inner housing, so I'll get as much power out of that pump as I can. Now that the stripper's gotten all nice and soaked in, we'll brush it off. And I could have taken a wire wheel to this, but I didn't want to ruin the sandblasting texture. When I did this the first time, I had access to a sandblaster and was able to... Sandblasting puts a nice paintable texture on the metal as it cleans it off. So if I'd taken a wire brush to it, I would have taken all that off and polished the steel. So I wanted to keep that texture, so I just put a little elbow grease into it and took the paint off this way. Another layer to get the second coat off. Back to the motor.
Now I'm the king of the swingers, oh, the jungle VIP. I've reached the top and had to...
I don't know how many of you noticed what's wrong with this picture, but leave a comment in there if you see what I've done wrong. I figured out later on. Back to the stripping, finish brushing it off.
What I desire is man's red fire to make my dream come true. Now give me the secret, man cub. Come on, conclude me. me what to do. Give me the power.
So I had to powder coat this pan in a different method. As you can see, this is one of the water tubes that transfers water from the pump to the heater box in the car. And that is smaller than the oil pan will not fit in the oven. So I had to bake it in a different method, and this created a few problems. For one, right there at the plug, I wasn't able to pre-bake it, so there was oil that got up through the paint, and then I got the heater too close and I burned it. It's still nice and protected, and I do fix it a little bit later on before I put it on, but I learned a lot by using this heater method, which I will show you right here. This is the intake manifold. You just sit there and let this heater bake it. As long as you don't get it too close, it doesn't burn it, and it nicely flows the paint in and fills everything. Now So what we have here is our heat guard over our exhaust manifold that bolts to the intake manifold. And what I'd like to know, JJ, is how did this happen? The entire underside of it is not painted. Did we forget, or did we think the paint would burn off because it's right next to the header? Huh, interesting. So, I don't know if I want to powder coat this or repaint it, because the paint did alright. This is high temp paint. So I decided to powder coat it, and I took the paint off and discovered a small little crack. It's right there. So let's straighten it out a little bit. It was flexing, and there's the crack. We'll drill a hole in the end of it to stop the crack from going any further, and we'll get the welding equipment out and weld it up. Now again, I always like to check fitment of everything before I put it in the car. This is really hard to do while it's in the car. And thank goodness I do that, because I have no idea how this happened. But this is the alternator I pulled off of the car. And yeah, that's not gonna work. So thanks to the magic of video, I'm off to Napa. Now this is a 60 amp internal regulated alternator, so it's not quite the right one. I'll have to do some wiring when I get it in the car, but it's a lot closer, and with a little bit of grinding off and resetting of the plate, put the oil pan back on. So I decided to paint it chrome. We'll see how it holds up to the heat. It should be okay. It's supposed to be heat resistant. Good job yet.
Pretty amazing.
This is a homemade air cleaner cover because we didn't have the right one. Thinking I need to redesign that to get cool air into the system. Has two pulleys. I don't know what year this is from. I'm thinking 75. This is either for power steering pump or AC, which neither are on this car. So my question to you is, do I leave this second pulley on or do I machine it off so I only have a single pulley? That way this isn't hanging out the end. So yeah, leave a comment, let me know. Thanks. Alright, well the motor's coming together real good, don't you think? And next time we will do an oil priming and then we'll time the distributor to the crank and maybe do a valve job. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.
Oh, life could be a dream if I could take you up in paradise up above.